Welcome to the Arganteal webinar. It's entitled Turning Expertise into Scalable Automation Using Arganteal ADepT. I'm Steve Kelly, the founder and CEO of Arganteal, and therefore I'm really not qualified to present this webinar. I'll introduce the people that will in a minute. Our focus today is on what it can do for you, not so much about how do you use it. We can do that subsequently. So with that, let me introduce Pete Gore and Mark Collins. Pete is our product manager, and he has over 20 years of experience doing automation with companies like Cisco. And Mark is our CTO, the Arganteal CTO, and he's previously worked in Dell CTO's office, and he's the lead developer for both ADepT and Ascot. Today, we'll be talking mostly about ADepT, but we'll mention Ascot along the way. So at that point, I will turn it over to Pete Gore.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciate you taking the time out to come and listen. I'm going to introduce automation and orchestration as we go through this. And as Steve just said, talk about the product and then have Mark do some pretty impressive demos. What I'm going to start with is kind of looking at automation and orchestration. For those of you who've joined us before, this will be nothing new, but I do like to set the boundaries of what we're talking about when we're talking about automation and orchestration. Then we'll look at the product suite around Arganteal, and throughout this, we'll be peppering in some demos from Mark. And any questions, please feel free to ask. Fire them into the chat, and we will be able to address those as we move through the session. You've got everybody on this call that can answer pretty much any question that can be posed. So please feel free. So like I said, we're going to start with the automation orchestration. We'll look at the product suite. We'll look at the capabilities, and then we'll be looking at the demos as we go through. So from an automation orchestration perspective, automation, as many of you are aware, we're performing in individual tasks, individual repetitive tasks via scripts, usually changing passwords on a router or a switch, or upgrading SNMP, or changing SNMP credentials, so on and so forth. When we look at orchestration, it's a group or a workflow of all of those individual tasks. So now when you're updating a password in a router, for example, you're also going to update your CMDB. You're also going to perform pre and post checks to make sure that that change that you just had is working successfully. And so when we go through this presentation, those are kind of the definitions that we're looking at. Feel free to post in the chat if you disagree. More than happy to have that discussion. So, introduction to automation, orchestration. Coordinated processes. Why orchestration? Every organization today is looking at orchestration, automation. How do I do more with less? Right? I don't know a single IT organization that I've spoken to whose budget has gone up. Invariably, that budget is going down, and the IT environment is getting more and more complex. So how do we deal with that? Right? How do we centralize the control? How do we gain better visibility and receive metadata off the infrastructure? And how do we get to faster root cause analysis? Right? This is where automation and orchestration can absolutely come into play, and does for a great many customers. So when we take a look at those different things and we look at the business impact, streamlining those operations, i.e. reducing manual work, again, reducing that ability to cause errors like humans have a tendency to do. Increasing efficiency, automating repetitive tasks like that password change, right? So some customers have to, by law, change their community strings, passwords, so on and so forth on their devices as a technical requirement. And so having the efficiency and the ability to go and change those things is really where automation and orchestration comes into play. We want to drive, as a maturity perspective, up from automation to orchestration, because we can just simply do more and standardize that process, leverage existing IP within inside the infrastructure, drive version control across the organization, and then maintain that scalability, but also stability inside the environment. And so ensuring that that complex IT is handled with higher loads without sacrificing performance and capabilities. This all sounds really easy, Pete, I hear you say. So what are some of the challenges and the complexity that I'm talking about really come into play, right? So people have got multi-cloud and hybrid environments, application dependencies that are really becoming more and more dependent and more latency specific across their environment. Operations from a perspective of how do you manage this more complex environment and this ever-expanding scaling environment? How do I handle technical debt? This is a massive issue that a lot of companies are inflicted by, right? So technology that's falling behind, code versions that are falling behind, basically the infrastructure through no fault of anybody's is really just falling behind and creating that technical debt. And then scalability. How many times have you been asked to do a maintenance upgrade, but then upper management has not given you the ability to go do that? You need to be able to showcase that you can make these changes to your environment in a seamless fashion without impacting the organization. So I don't know if you're one of the 75% that Gartner estimates is having these issues, but if you are, we're here to help you solve some of those issues and talk about the different solutions that we have in place that can help you solve. All right, so when we look at the different products from Arganteal, we have Ascot, which Mark will talk about in a few minutes when he's showing you around. And then ADepT. This is our orchestration platform. It's tied to the fact that it can solve a lot of issues, just like other competitors out there that, the Red Hats of this world, the Terraforms of this world. And we have ADepT. The beauty and the difference with ADepT is it's language agnostic. So what does that mean? When organizations have people brought in, they're typically knowledgeable in, say, Python or Yang or Java or Perl script. And the platforms that you're using typically don't support that multi-language capability to create workflows. This is where ADepT comes into play. ADepT is absolutely agnostic, platform agnostic, language agnostic across the board. This helps you with solving your issues of complexity by not having to retrain your entire staff. You're able to build and leverage orchestration across your organization, leveraging the existing IP that you already have inside your organization. And that's where Ascot comes into play. Another issue that we have is a lot of your IP is sitting on a very smart person's laptop, but it's not checked in. It hasn't been code reviewed. It's not in a single shared location that you can leverage. And so how do you go out and find that? And that's where that's why we brought in Ascot. When talking to customers, one of the things that they talked about was the ability to go and find this technology, go find these scripts so they can reuse this language or these capabilities that they may or may not even know exist, right? So why reinvent the wheel? And that's why we have Ascot. Again, we're leveraging AI around that, and Mark will be able to talk about that some more in a few minutes, to be able to find those scripts, parse those scripts out, understand what they do, and then put those into a repository where it becomes fully searchable so that you're able to reuse that script and that technology that's already been crafted out, already been troubleshot, and then even pull that into an existing workflow. All right, so with all of that, let me turn this over to Mark real quick. He is going to do an introduction demo on what I'm talking about and showcase to you ADepT and how you can access it. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Pete. So I'm not sure you can see my screen yet. Can you let me know when you can see that?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. I'm going to stop the camera just for push capability on my end. So what you're seeing here is the sign-in screen, typical sign-in screen. We've got a sign-up option. Once you sign up, we will send you an email to validate your environment. But the first thing that you'll notice when ADepT pops up is the repository, your own private repository of scripts. As you can see here, I've got about 9,000 scripts, and those are across a variety of languages. And in fact, when you're looking at the graph as it comes up, you'll see the different types of scripts. In this particular instance, I've got some Python scripts. I'm going to have some PowerShell scripts. I've got some Bash scripts, Perl. We currently support about 24 different languages. The next thing that you'll see is that we've got a shared repository. That shared repository is exactly what you would think, and that is I'm sharing scripts as a SME, maybe with some operators. I might be sharing scripts with other individuals inside of my organization. I happen to be a Python guy. Somebody else might happen to be PowerShell, but they're building a workflow, and we need to be able to support both capabilities. So that's where we would actually share information. The discovery piece here, that's Ascot. That's our ML engine that goes through your scripts, regardless of the language, and begins to determine what they do and how they operate, and starts building a hierarchy around them and the relationship between all those scripts, which is what you're seeing in that graph here. And then the last piece that we really talk about is the administrative component, and that's how you set up all the functionality that you're working with ADepT. On the left-hand side is the three main areas that you're going to see, and that is the scripts that you've uploaded into the environment. The next one are the scripts, the libraries, and those are scripts that you've actually gone through, parsed, and you want to make and use into your workflows. And then the workflows themselves that you'll actually see in the environment. So pretty easy. The last piece I'll cover is just the ability to script those scripts, any word, any function, any language type that you want, and then quickly narrow those down so that you can actually begin your work. So with that, Pete, I will turn it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Mark. So again, those of you who've been with me before will have seen this slide before. And so why are we looking at it again? Well, so a lot of customers that we deal with are typically high 1, low 2 capabilities when it comes to automation and orchestration across their environment. So when we look at, level 1, it really is automation, right? It's not orchestration. It is single scripts being run. It helps the organization. It helps with speeding things up and getting things done. But it is person orientated. It's person initiated. It's not typically organizationally approved necessarily, should I say. It hasn't been peer reviewed, etc. But this is where a lot of people find themselves, right? So when we start looking at solutions like Ascot and we start looking at solutions like ADepT, this is where we can start coming up through the maturity model, moving into opportunistic, moving into systematic. And let's be realistic, right? I mean, none of this, you're not going to get one big red easy button, push it, and all of a sudden you're at level 4, right? This takes work. But what Mark was just showing and the capabilities of the multi-agnostic language capabilities, which we have up to about 20 right now. And should you come and say, hey, Pete, can you help us support this language? We can roll that out into the solution in about 6 weeks. That includes testing, et cetera, right? So, but we're able to add to that portfolio, add to that scene, that list of languages that we support today, in a fairly short period of time, right? To help enable your environment, help drive what you're doing inside of your organization. And so the objective here is when I work with customers, everybody would love to get to level 4. Level 5 is more like your Googles of this world, where they're able to do, they've trusted a lot over to AI, they're auto remediating. And when we take a step back and understand that most customers are not going to be happy with computers suddenly controlling their environment, making decisions on their behalf, especially in a security area, right? They want things checked. They want that human interaction. So that's why over probably a 2-year period, you're looking at a systematic approach, level 3, driving towards level 4. But the benefits that you're going to see out of even reaching a level 3 are going to be huge, right? The business value, the savings in OpEx, or the reallocation of OpEx, the ability to drive CapEx in a much greater fashion. All of this comes from rising up through the maturity model. And you're going to be able to do this with the tools such as Ascot and ADepT. And we'll be able to showcase some of the capabilities of those tools in just a few minutes.
So, Pete, Roger Hutton just asked a question, which we sort of answered, but we should touch on again. What would be the process if a user might need a language that's beyond what we currently support?
So that would be reaching out to myself, really, as the product manager. We would evaluate that solution. We would get on the phone and find out exactly what it was that you were looking to do, what features within inside that language that would be needed. Mark and I would then sit down and discuss. Mark being the CTO, he needs to bless obviously everything that goes into the product. Just because I come up with brilliant ideas doesn't mean that he has to implement them. And so from that perspective, yeah, we would discuss that. We would get back with the customer and say, obviously we can do this. It will take X period of time. We would greatly appreciate if you would be involved in some of the testing to make sure that we're achieving what it is that you're looking for. And then we would roll that out for their use. And like I said, it would take about 6 weeks.
And we just recently did that with Microsoft's new Bicep language, which we added to the group.
We did. Great question. Thank you, sir. All right. So how do we make all this magic happen, right? So we're focusing on ADepT. We'll do another session around Ascot and how that goes out and finds your information and pulls that back into a centralized repository and then gets analyzed and pushed into a word cloud so that it can be searched on, all that good stuff. So we're going to focus on the ADepT platform. We're going to leverage libraries, which Mark will cover in just a few minutes. So you librarize your environments, right? So scripts is a well-known word from a buzzword perspective. We've changed the word out from scripts, or the industry has changed the word out from scripts to code because it sounds better, right? So now we're doing infrastructure as code. We're doing changes inside the environment by leveraging code. Really, these are just scripts, right, that are being pulled in together. This is why we talk about scripting languages. We talked about automation script deployments into workflows. And when I turn this back to Mark, he'll be able to show you where we keep our libraries, how the word cloud is built around those libraries, and then most importantly, how the agnostic environment of any scripting language is how we can pull those into a workflow. And then through the aspect of librarization, we can start creating dynamic credentials around IPs, DNS, various credentials, so on and so forth. This is where we want to drive to, right? So when you think back to the maturity model, this is what we're wanting to do. This is how you get to higher level 2s, level 3s, right? Is by being able to operate these workflows and then lower the operational experience required, because you have your smart people who have created these workflows, created these environments, and then you have your operations folks who are able to execute on these things in a controlled fashion for them, right? It reduces the manual effort. We're operating at the speed of code, so obviously it's going to save time. We're standardizing the processes around this, so that's an important thing that we've covered in the past, is how processes have to adapt, right? If you don't adapt your processes, you just end up doing bad things faster. So as you start changing and optimizing your environment, you have to take a look at the processes, which, as I say here, standardizes that process down. That's what you train your people to then go do. And that's what they leverage, which makes it a far better environment across your organization. And then again, I can't hint on this enough. Having been in the industry for a long time, it's very frustrating to have to convert scripts over to a specific language and have them re-architected. So the fact that this ADepT is language agnostic is a great change, a game changer in my perspective. Okay, so again, we'll do a separate session on Ask Up, but this is where it helps you decide, what scripts are out there, what can be reused, what can be libratized, and then how do you pull all of those scripts into your environment so that they can be leveraged as part of your reusable IP. And this is a word cloud that we actually leverage AI and machine learning to create, which then becomes searchable across your environment to be able to reuse that IP inside your environment. We build out those different libraries. Again, we'll talk about the shared environment in a little bit, but we have private and we have shared depositories and libraries that we can share across organizations, across companies, if you are open to doing that as well. So the workflow creation, we'll see Mark do this in a few minutes, but building out the workflow. So we're leveraging, script logic file. I just wrote script logic. It's work coming from the word cloud, but now we have multiple different files. As you can see, we've got multi-language in there as well. So we have the professional, the PowerShell script in there along with the Python scripts. And we can add as many of these as we need to. So we compile the workflow for a new deployment inside your environment, and all in one visual tool that you were looking at just a few minutes ago. Before I move on to the demo, Mark, is there anything you wish to add here that I may have missed?
Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, I mean, one of the key aspects of ADepT design is the language agnostic capability. Our goal is to let your engineers use the languages they know, because they're already productive in it, they're already experts in it, and there's no new language for them to learn. If you look at many of the other development tools that are out there, they have their own domain-specific language. Now, Ansible uses YAML. Terraform obviously has its own language. Chef and Puppet have theirs, which are kind of Ruby-like, and it goes on and on. That costs you time and money, because it means that your engineers have to now go from their expertise and become novices in that new environment. They eventually, over time, will get there, but we don't require that. We want your guys to be able to come in there, use the tools and the technology and expertise they have to quickly get your deployments going. And I think the other thing that's interesting about our specific approach is that the industry themselves states that deployment tools are kind of like glazed potato chips. You can't have just one. And even the recent news of IBM acquiring Terraform, they already had Ansible, but they're using Terraform for all the infrastructure components and then Ansible for the rest of the application services and so on. But one of the dirty little secrets is there's got to be some overarching orchestration script to even pull those two components together. And that's where we play, is that we want to be that glue logic that solves all your deployment problems, but allows your folks to be experts where they already are.
Thank you, sir. With that, I'm going to actually turn it back to Mark and ask him to do a demo related to building a workflow. In true fashion, we've actually done this as a recorded video. Live demos, for those of you who've been around a while, typically have an issue. If you're going to have an issue, it's going to be while I'm trying to present and do a live demo for you. So what I'm going to do, we've recorded this. Mark is going to talk to it. If you have any questions or thoughts or would like to see the actual, walk through this live, we will be sharing our contact information at the end of this. And so you're more than welcome. We can set up a private overview of the tool set and demos as well. Mark?
Okay, thanks, Pete. So this is actually a video from one of our senior engineers who was working on a multi-language workflow with a customer. And in fact, one of the things that you'll see in this particular instance is the language is Bicep. Bicep is the language that Microsoft uses for their Azure environment. And in this particular instance, the customer already had some Python scripts, they had some PowerShell scripts, and they were trying to migrate those along with some of the Bicep components for Azure. So what you see here is the engineer has taken the user's Python scripts, which were what we call dependencies. Anybody that's done any type of Python work, you import the framework or library components. In our environment, those are just considered dependencies, and that the Python scripts will need those. The next component was the actual Bicep script themselves and the Bicep configuration parameter script, along with the PowerShell component that will call both of those files. All of that is what is used to actually set up the Azure cloud environment. And then the remaining pieces that you'll actually see in the script here are the components that are necessary in order to actually build out the specific virtual private cloud. Obviously, you have your security groups, you've got your IP addressing, you've got your DNS components, and so on. And that becomes the basis for forming your virtual private cloud. The last couple pieces that you'll actually see in here is actually creating the VM itself. Again, where you're setting up subnets for your IP, your DNS names for those particular scripts, and so on. And so, very simple, mixed language environment. And then the orchestration script can actually be in a totally different language as well. In this particular instance, the customer wanted to use a compiled type of Python, but it could be anything you want. We have Java, we have Python, we have PowerShell, and we have Bash scripts. Pretty common for most deployment environments.
All right. Thank you, Mark. While I've got you, can you address the word cloud real briefly over to the right so that people understand what that is and where that came from?
Sure. I didn't cover that, but absolutely. If you guys can see that, let me know.
I'm just putting you on the spot, Mark. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. So during the parsing process, especially with Ascot, one of the things that we do is we don't just look at the script from a language construct. So the lexer and the grammar from the parser components are actually going to look at it from an execution perspective, but we actually use natural language parsing and use what we call precision language models that are specific around that language, any of the libraries or frameworks that we know may be in that type of language. And then we begin to summarize what that script does. And the words that you see that are very large are what are common across your entire library portfolio, right? So if I have 9,000 scripts here and I'm looking at something like the word public, and it's a really large font, what you can do is you can actually highlight over that word and it'll tell you how many other different scripts use that function, use that variable, use that value component, or even use that word, because we even look at the comments that are inside of your scripts. When you see the very, very small words, those are what are unique about that script. So what you get is a kind of a real quick summarization in a word cloud of exactly what that script is doing. So you're going to know, oh, this is an Azure Management Network component. It happens to be headless. I'm actually creating the infrastructure components for that script, and that's what this level of that script does for what you're trying to do in your workflow.
Fantastic.
So
Thanks,
that's
sir.
kind of the word cloud component in a nutshell.
Yep. Guys, if you've got any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments. We do have a person watching for those things, as you saw earlier when Steve chimed in. So again, please feel free to ask questions as we go through. All right. What did I just do? Sorry, guys, got to get back to the PowerPoint. Hang on. All right. All right, so how do we get started on this, right? So again, when we talk about the key considerations, the pitfalls, one of the key things here is making sure that you don't get overly complex on your orchestration environment, right? It will build, it will get to the point where it is easy to maintain if you have a good roadmap to doing this, right? And one of those things is don't jump straight to the keyboard, right? Make sure that as you look at your environment, making sure that the workflows that you're creating are easy to maintain, right? So as you saw there in ADepT, we were able to list out the multi-language capabilities, all the different scripts, and look at those different scripts and what they're able to do with inside that workflow as it was built. Therefore, making it fairly easy to maintain and modify. But also remember, automation is not, again, the big red easy button, right? It does take work. Again, hitting on the processes, you have to standardize on your processes. Inconsistent processes, again, you're just doing bad things faster, right? And then also think about integration challenges. Again, one of the great things around ADepT is because it is agnostic, we don't have integration issues, right? We integrate with pretty much I won't say 100%, but pretty much everything that's out there is something that you have to think about, right? Is what am I going to integrate with as I roll out this orchestration platform? And then think about what is your level of success? So you need a strategic objective, right? Set out goals. We've talked about this before, right? Set out a vision, set out an objective, and then set out a roadmap that's going to actually allow you to get there. And then make sure that the platforms from an integration perspective, cross-platform capabilities, right? Nobody has just one architecture or one vendor inside their environment. So multi-vendor capability is going to be important. Cross-tool integration. I can't tell you the number of times I've spoken to customers where they have a tool that talks to one database but not the other, so they have to build a fourth tool in between so that they can pull those in. Different languages where you have skill sets and very skilled and intelligent people, but they're only fluent in one language, programming language, right? Or they know one existing platform, but they don't know the other platforms to try and make things work in a unified fashion. The quote we have down there, right? 45% of the orchestration projects fail due to lack of this success criteria, right? It's very important. I know a lot as engineers, we all want to jump to the keyboard, but defining that criteria carefully is very important. All right, with that said, I'm going to turn it back to Mark, and he's going to show us how we're going to build out multiple VMs leveraging ADepT in a similar workflow that we just looked at.
Thanks, Pete. Hopefully you guys can see my screen again.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now. Sorry, Mark. I'm a little slow. All right, ready?
Okay. So what I want to point out in this is that that same engineer was then asked, okay, great, you've created one Azure environment for me, but the problem is I've got a whole bunch of other different machines that have to go into this service that I want to deploy. So we introduced this concept of data sets. In simplistic terms, they're effectively CSV files that you can actually modify and create inside of Excel. And the concept here is that when we go and actually build a workflow, we can tell you what particular values you're going to need in order for that workflow to execute on that target machine. That's great when you look at it from one machine, but what happens when I've got a dozen machines that I have to set up? And some are database servers, some might be domain controllers, some might be load balancers, and so on, right? What the data set gives you the ability to do is identify all the different variable components that you're going to modify in that workflow so that you can run it on those dozen different machines. but it allows your subject matter experts to build the overall workflow and then share those scripts with your operators for your deployment folks. In this particular instance, what you see is that we've taken a dozen different machines that have different IP addresses, maybe different domain locations, maybe different functions or different types of server setups inside of Azure. Some might be a small, might be a standard, and so on. And we take that data set, turn it into a library, and then we can take that data set and drag it into the existing workflow. What you'll see in this particular instance is that by taking that data set and dragging that into the workflow, it now creates a script for each and every one of the machines that you are actually looking to deploy. Now, the one thing that's interesting about this is that we've already set up in the first portion of the script up there, we've set up the environment. But as you put that data set in there, it starts to create a looping construct. So those 4 different scripts that sit below it, it's going to take all that information from the CSV file line by line and inject it into each one of those scripts. So you no longer have a workflow that just addresses one machine. You have a workflow that can address a dozen machines or 1,000 machines. The other thing that you noticed here is because this is in Python, we still have to address the scoping component, and each one of those 4 scripts below do require the credentials and the utility components. So what he's done is he's actually added that in. Now, what you're seeing in this environment is that it's taken those components, pulled them in from that data set, and added them into the workflow script by script by script for the overall machine. It also means that you can then take that data set, build a workflow, and then create a brand new workflow that addresses not the individual single machines, but doing multiple machines simultaneously. You can add to it. You can remove components from it, which is what he's actually doing in this environment. And you may have instances where maybe the resource groups are differently, because one might be for engineering, one might be for production or operations. But once that's complete, you have your own inline data set that you can then use for other different types of workflows as well. And the beauty of this is that you can actually have a workflow that consists of other different workflows as well. So this can get as complex and as deep as you want. What he's showing in this particular portion is instead of having to go through each one of those scripts independently, you can actually change all of them simultaneously, kind of like anybody that's done any type of work inside of Visual Studio Code. When you're looking at a bunch of different files and you want to make a change to one particular field type. So that's multi-language workflows with a looping construct built into it. Very powerful, and something that our customers have told us is very unique and helps them actually with their deployments on not just one, but when you have a myriad of missions that you have to address. I'll turn it back.
It means that a slightly lower level engineer can go put an update on 50 servers just by filling out a spreadsheet.
That's it. And then just drag the spreadsheet over on top of the workflow and you're done. And I noticed there's a question by Roger. So can we actually take on some of that work for the users? Yeah, actually, in this particular instance, the customer was actually just starting to do their Azure deployment and was just learning Bicep. And Bicep at the time wasn't completely formalized and wasn't finished. So one of the things that we actually did was built the Lexer and the grammar for the Bicep components and then showed them how they could actually use that for their Azure deployment. So that's something we can absolutely do, and through our professional services group.
Right, and we have a professional services group. So if you wanted to out-task applying this to part of your environment, we could also do that.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question,
All right.
Roger.
Yep. All right, Kristen, if you could transfer back to me. The presentation.
She says your screen is gone.
Really?
I think you can just go present now. Maybe.
Yeah, that's what I thought I was. Present. Okay. I killed it. You wouldn't believe I'm a technician.
There it is.
All right. So, as you probably picked up on, as we've gone through this session, right? We haven't really touched on how you need to be a developer, right? A programmer. You're able to leverage existing environments that other people have built, which is key towards our low-code automation, right? The fact that it's available in SaaS or on-prem gives you wonderful flexibility around where to actually deploy the platform. And again, as we talk about the fact that we have, the native scripts, we have different ADepT files that we can create, such as libraries and workflows. We've got the data that Mark was just talking about from a perspective of the looping construct, right? So defining the design parameters around all of the word clouds to make things sortable and reusable inside the environment. And then, so from a script source perspective, a lot of people out there are already using GitHub consultants, so back to Roger's question about can we help from a professional services perspective? Absolutely. Scripts that have been found via Ascot. And as we'll talk about in just a few seconds, the ability to share. So the ability to use other people's scripts that have been developed, code tested, and then made available for everybody else to use, all driving towards a compiled environment that is able to then go and organize and operate your environment in a much more smoother, seamless fashion. So with that said, we do have the shared repository that we're talking about here. This is a very powerful function. The capability to share in a public environment, the capability to share across your organization, or even across organizations, right? Across different companies. And this is a separate tab at the top. I've highlighted it. I'm actually going to ask Mark to comment on this. If, again, I like putting Mark on the spot. So Mark, do you want to address some of this?
Sure. To Roger's comment earlier about doing some of the work for our customers, in this particular instance, not only can you share publicly inside of your organization or maybe groups inside of your organization, in this instance, what happened was our engineer actually built this for a customer and then shared it through the utility to their organization. And as an organization under the administration tab, you have the ability to define what that sharing mechanism might look like. Who's allowed to share, what they're allowed to share, and where they're allowed to share. Again, whether it's inside of your group to group inside of your organization, from a contractor outside of your organization into it, or from your organization to another organization. It's extremely powerful, and you can share those libraries and workflows once they're complete.
To some extent, that might be the main point of the entire tool, is to enable that capability.
Right, because you want to have your experts actually building those scripts and those workflows and then sharing it with your operations folks so that they don't have to go build them. They need to get that and that software and those services deployed, and they want to let the experts on those devices actually create those scripts and workflows for them.
Fantastic. All right. So this is actually my final slide. Again, I just want to reiterate, any technology, one methodology. You've heard us hit on it a lot, the agnostic capabilities, right? So multi-cloud platforms, a lot of customers are dealing with this today. ADepT can absolutely deal with that. From an operating systems perspective, again, agnostic. We're not that worried about what you're running. The different technologies, these logos will continue to grow, do continue to grow. I've only got so much room on the slide. And then from a scripting language perspective, like I said, today we're up to about 20. If there's a different language that you would like us to support, we absolutely have the capabilities to go in and add that and enhance your environment. So that said, what would the next steps be? So please give us a call. If you want to talk about your solutions and how automation and different processes can help you drive inside your environment, please reach out to me. If you wish to see a more in-depth demonstration or talk specifically about and get into the weeds on ADepT or Ascot, Mark is fully available and able to help you out with that. Or come through me, and I'll if as we progress, I'm happy to pull in Mark and we can have those conversations, or Steve, or whoever we need. So that's what we wanted to cover today. Thank you so much for your time. I hope it was a good use of your time, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thanks a bunch. Oh,
Thanks, guys. That was great.
Steve, there's a question for you.
Is the solution from Roger? One last question: how is the solution currently available commercially? Is Arganteal working with working with or through resellers? We are certainly interested in offering our product through resellers. That may be one of our main ways to go to market. As it is today, you can go on site at adept.arganteal.com and get a free trial. And when the free trial expires, you can turn that into a license for a single seat, and then build up in the number of seats over time. So yes, it's commercially available right now, and we're interested in showing it and marketing it through partners wherever possible. And with that, I think we'll call it a day. I really appreciate you guys listening to what we have to say, and we really appreciate the chance to talk to you further and kind of go look at your specific instance and what you need on that ladder of progression that Pete showed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.